Why is it that the things you love most are often the hardest to start? You aren't lazy and you haven't lost your passion. You're suffering from the pedestal effect. When a project matters too much, your brain views imperfection as a threat, triggering a self-sabotaging freeze response that keeps you paralyzed. And today, we're going to dismantle it completely. Think about the last time you genuinely wanted to do something. Maybe it was a creative project, a short film, a business idea, a painting, a piece of writing, something that felt like yours, something that excited you. And then think about how long it sat there, untouched, waiting. Meanwhile, you answered emails, you cleaned your desk, you did every low-stakes task you'd been putting off for weeks because suddenly those felt easy. This is the procrastination paradox. The higher the stakes, the harder it is to begin. And the cruel twist, the stakes feel highest for the things you care about most. Conventional wisdom tells us procrastination is a time management problem, but research in behavioral psychology tells a different story. Procrastination isn't about time, it's about emotion. In a 2013 study published in the journal Psychological Science, Dr. Fushkia Sirowa and Timothy Seikel found that procrastination is fundamentally an emotional regulation strategy. When a task triggers anxiety, self-doubt, or fear of failure, the brain doesn't process it as a task to be completed. It processes it as a threat to be avoided. And here's the key insight. The more meaningful the task, the more emotional weight it carries, which means the more you care, the more likely you are to freeze. Let's give this a name, the pedestal effect. When you place a project on a pedestal, when it becomes the thing that will finally prove your talent, validate your effort, or define your identity, you stop seeing it as a task. You start seeing it as a verdict. And nobody wants to begin something that might end in a verdict against them. Here's what's happening inside your brain. The prefrontal cortex, the rational, planning part of your mind, knows you need to start. It understands deadlines, consequences, and long-term goals. But the amygdala, the emotional alarm system, detects the threat of potential failure and fires a stress signal. When that signal is strong enough, it suppresses the prefrontal cortex entirely. Your ability to plan, prioritize, and act gets hijacked by a fear response designed for physical danger. Your brain, quite literally, cannot tell the difference between a predator and a blank page. This is why perfectionism and procrastination are almost always found together. Perfectionism doesn't drive excellence, it drives avoidance. The perfectionist doesn't delay because they don't care. They delay because they care so much that starting feels like the most dangerous thing they could do. There's also a second layer to the pedestal effect, and it's subtler: identity protection. When you haven't started yet, you still have the full potential version of your project alive in your imagination. It's perfect up there, it's brilliant, and as long as you don't touch it, it stays that way. The moment you begin, you have to face the gap between the vision and the execution. And for many people, that gap feels unbearable, not because they lack skill, but because they've built the project into a monument to who they want to be. The artist who says, "I'll write my novel when I have more time," isn't waiting for time. They're protecting the idea of themselves as someone who could write a great novel, because starting means risking the reality that it might be just okay. So how do you get off the pedestal? The first and most important shift is this: separate your identity from the output. Your project is not you. It is a thing you are making. It exists in the world, separate from your worth as a person. A bad first draft doesn't mean you're a bad writer. A failed experiment doesn't mean you're a failed thinker. The work can be imperfect while you remain intact. This sounds obvious. It is not easy, but it is a skill. And like any skill, it improves with deliberate repetition. The second strategy is what psychologists call implementation intentions. Instead of setting a vague goal like, I'll work on my project this week, you define the exact moment you will start. At 9 a.m. on Tuesday, I will sit at my desk and write for 20 minutes. Research by Peter Gollwitzer at NYU shows that this simple reframing increases follow-through by up to 300%. Why? Because you've removed the decision entirely. There's no negotiation with your avoidant brain in the moment. The plan is already made. Third, reduce the stakes of the first session. Don't start with the goal of producing something good. Start with the goal of producing something. Anything. Screenwriters call this vomit draft. Designers call it a throwaway sketch. Scientists call it a pilot run. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that you give yourself explicit permission to make something bad so that your brain stops treating the first step as a high-stakes performance. The amygdala responds to perceived threat. If you lower the stakes in your own framing, you lower the physiological response. You can literally trick your nervous system into allowing you to begin. Fourth, and perhaps most counterintuitively, acknowledge the resistance directly. Psychologist Susan David calls this emotional agility, the ability to face difficult internal experiences without being controlled by them. When you notice the avoidance, instead of fighting it or judging yourself for it, you name it. I'm avoiding this because it matters to me, and I'm afraid it won't be as good as I want it to be. That act of naming does something neurologically fascinating. It activates the prefrontal cortex, the very part of the brain the amygdala was suppressing, and reduces the emotional charge of the fear. You don't eliminate the resistance, you make it smaller. And finally, build a system that makes starting frictionless. Remove obstacles between you and the work. Keep your tools ready. Close unnecessary tabs. Use the same physical space, the same ritual, the same cue every time you begin. Your brain thrives on pattern. When starting feels automatic, the emotional negotiation becomes much shorter. Here's what I want you to take from this. The things you keep delaying are probably the things that matter most to you. Your procrastination isn't a character flaw, it's evidence of how much you care. But caring too much in the wrong way becomes a cage. The goal isn't to stop caring. The goal is to hold your work lightly enough that you can actually touch it. Take it off the pedestal, not because it doesn't deserve to be there, but because work that stays on a pedestal never gets made. And the world doesn't need your perfect imaginary project. It needs the real, imperfect, alive version that only you can make. Start badly. Start today. If this video resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who has a project they've been putting off. And if you want to go deeper on the psychology of motivation and creative resistance, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. See you in the next one.